you'll see a little question mark icon. As we're going through the presentation, if you have specific questions about the slides or what I'm saying, pop it into that chat. At the very end, we'll leave a few minutes for questions. We'll have a Q&A mode, and you can use that little chat icon. It'll highlight the questions for us. If there's any technical issues, audio or anything else like that, feel free to put it into the chat. Our moderator, Catherine, is able to help and will be able to work through some challenges with you. And anything else, comments, concerns, whatever, that's what the chat's there for. So without further ado, let's dig into the presentation. So my name is Stephen Nettleton, and I've been working with Waterplay close to 10 years now. And I've had the privilege of working in different areas of the company, from design, a little bit out on the kind of manufacturing end of things. I worked with designing water treatment systems for a time. My background is mechanical engineering, and I really have landed and felt connected at the company on kind of a sales technical support end. I work with behind the scenes with our sales team to bring projects to life. We talk through projects with engineers and architects and installers and designers all day long. It's really neat seeing a large variety of projects. You never really know what you're going to run into in a day, and there's a ton of people out there in the world just having all types of different projects. As you can see, I am greeting you from the basement of my home due to the current world conditions with COVID-19. So wherever you are, I hope that you are safe. I hope that you are well. You might be like me and working in, from home or from a different location, just trying to be as safe as possible in these times. So if you do hear some noise, I do have a 2-year-old that's running around the house sometimes. We're trying to keep him occupied. So please don't be distracted. It's just something that comes with the reality of our situation in these times. But wherever you are, I hope you're well and keeping safe. And I appreciate this time where we can just talk about something a little more normal like this. So without further ado, we have a few learning outcomes today. This is something that we're hoping to give to you guys and discuss. So we want to learn the most effective methods to receive shipments and prepare the job site. It doesn't sound super riveting, but there are some important little points that we want to make there. Discover tips and tricks in the pre-shipment phase, product preparation, excavation, concrete, electrical, and plumbing work. All the really good stuff. This is where the meat and potatoes of the install happens. We want to talk a little bit more about the finishing work, the whole installation process, product assembly, and handover to your customer. So at the end of the day here, especially for our installers, what I really hope this presentation gives you is that you can increase the speed of your installation because you're avoiding delays, you don't have rework and repetition. It's also going to hopefully save you some money and increase the quality of your finished project. So the very first thing that you're going to be doing is, after we talked a lot about planning in yesterday's webinar, when you actually go to install it, you definitely need to check your call before you dig. Depending where you are, you're going to have a different phone number, different states have different contacts. Please check with your local jurisdiction. The last thing you want to do is start your project off by hitting a gas line or who knows what. It could be it could be anything. So that's very important. First step. Next up, you're going to want to have some sort of a site survey, geotech report. You really want to be sure of what you're building on top of. If you build on, it could be marsh, it could be swamp, sand. It's going to cause you some problems as you go to pour footings. It's going to cause problems for the park over the years as you see shifting and settling. So the very first thing, start with a firm foundation, site survey, geotech. And then you're ready to do some excavation. So level things out. You're going to want to clear the area. Here you can see that it looks like they're removing a forest for this project, so that's pretty intense. Hopefully yours is not to that level, but if you start with a flat area, it will go a long ways for you. Most features, actually every feature is going to require some type of footing just to stabilize the component. So typically this is your first step when you're on site and after you have an excavated clear area, is you're going to prepare your footings. It could be as simple as digging down with an auger. You might have a site where you have precast footings. You might have square footings, round footings. Whatever size and shape of footings you have, this is going to be where you start here. Now your footings are going to be specified by your project engineer, and they need to review the weights of the components, they need to review the building codes, look at things like what do you design for wind speed and items like that. So work with them closely to size the footings, but essentially this is where you're going to start. You can see here these guys are using an auger and simply coring out an area and filling it in with rebar reinforcement. When product starts to arrive from your manufacturer, we try and make note of this because it's a pretty big step and quite often it gets overlooked. So you really want to inspect your shipment carefully. Know what you're supposed to be receiving. As a manufacturer, I can speak to this. We are at the mercy of truck drivers and courier companies, and typically they're really good. You get the odd shipment here or there. There's one or two a year where unfortunately there is some damage that's present. It could just be maybe they cross-docked it, maybe there was an errant forklift driver, maybe something happened along the way, especially for those of you that are phoning in from Brazil and Spain. You know that you're quite a large distance from most of, from your manufacturers, and you really need to be careful, especially on an ocean container. It could have gone through a storm and things could have rocked pretty heavily in that container. So if you're lucky, you'll receive a whole container like this. Not all shipments will have a full sea can. Most of the time they'll be in a truck packaged up like this. It's not as it is strapped, and we do secure the loads. We do everything that we can to make sure nothing moves during the shipment. But the very first thing that you should do is request photos from your manufacturer and compare the photos with what you receive. Have them handy, have them on your phone, have them. I mean, you could even print them out and just reference them compared to what you see when you unload the truck. And if something looks different, then start to dig. Start to go in there, see what moved, why it moved, what happened, and make sure there's no damage. If there is damage, note it on your bill of lading. Now, quite often your truck driver's in a rush to get out of there. He's trying to pressure you to get rid of drop his load. He has another delivery to make, or whatever the case may be. It's fully within your rights to take your time, go through, inspect the shipment. Sorry, truck drivers are going to hate me for this, but it's a pretty expensive product. You want to make sure that it ends up at your site in one piece. Count your items, make sure everything is there, and if there's a problem, reach out to your manufacturer right away. They should be able to help you resolve it with the freight company. If you don't act quickly, there's very little recourse. It just gets messier. So act quickly, and it helps smooth out any potential problems. The other thing that you're going to want to do is you want to protect the product through the installation. So leave the wrapping on. So most of the time, you'll see something like this where manufacturers with powder-coated product, they'll have a protective wrapping on it. You wouldn't ship it without any type of protection. So this is typically what you'll see during an installation. As you put the features on, you'll see protective wrapping in place. Make sure that you're not getting moisture trapped in there too, and boiling it in a hot sun or anything like that. If you do end up getting a lot of moisture inside of the wrapping, at that point it's appropriate to unwrap it, let it dry out, but make sure that it's dry, secure, leave protective wrapping on as much as possible, even just to keep it cleaner during the install. Construction sites are dirty places, and when you hand this over to your customer, you really want it to be clean. You want it to pop. You want it to be looking amazing, and they'll be so thrilled with it. During the pre-shipment phase, this is where you're dealing with everything that is below concrete. So like I said before, the meat and potatoes, the fun part. First thing you do is when you're pouring your footings, you're going to want to also cast your anchor bolts in place. Now there's two ways that you can do your anchor bolts. This is the most common that we see, and this is our experience. This is traditionally what's done is you cast your anchor bolts into your concrete footing. You'll probably brace them with something like this on site. Just use some scrap wood and you can hang them in place. You can, pour your concrete footings, wait a day or so, and then pop the anchor bolts in place once things are starting to harden, but not quite too hard to put them in there. The other method that we see quite often, and then this is perfectly acceptable, is we see something like a hilting anchor, where you chemically anchor the bolts in place. And that's not a problem at all. It's pretty common, very strong. They use a very strong epoxy. As long as your project engineer is happy with that, no problem there at all. But the Typically, you'll have manufacturers to send out anchor bolts to precast in place. Now, a lot of manufacturers use what we call an attach and exchange base. This is a really, really strong idea. It's pretty common in the industry now. Most people have it. It allows you to remove features and put on new features in the future. We talked yesterday about how you can use these for a phased installation. You can plan for the future. You can plan for maintenance. It's a really smart idea. Some of the other advantages we just listed out here, just so you can review this, but you have a clean design. You don't have any, it could be flush, no toe guards or anything else like that. You can have a quick install. Most of the features typically would just bolt onto place. You can see most of the work actually is done below ground, and if you're able to get that fairly quickly, you can speed up your whole installation timeline. You don't have to wait for painted product. You could do an early shipment of everything that goes in the ground and have it on site within 2 weeks or so, depending on the manufacturer, of course. Project phasing, like we said yesterday, maintenance, you can refurbish the park in the future. So attach and exchange bases, if you're not familiar with them, definitely encourage you to look into that. It's an excellent tool for parks across the board. So once you have your base in place, now I tried to put a few different variety of bases because there's different methods, different ways. But whatever you have, if it's stainless steel, it's going to require grounding and bonding. So bonding is where you daisy chain all of your features together. You loop them together with ground wire, like you can see in the photos here. And then grounding is where you take it off. Sometimes you can tie it in with rebar. Sometimes code does not allow you to do that. But you take it to a grounding point off the pad. This makes sure that you can't have a difference in voltage between any features. There's no risk to patrons if there was. An electrical charge, say a lightning strike, which hopefully nobody is in the park during a lightning storm. Not a good place to be during a lightning storm. If there is something like that, it has a safe place to go and discharge into the earth. So it's an important step. Lots of times it seems to get overlooked until the last minute, and oh no, we gotta ground it and bond it. So please consider this ahead of time. Make sure that your electrical has this in there. If you have a subtrade for electrical, that they have this in their scope of work, and they're able to do this. And typically, it's just like a number 6 copper bare wire is sufficient for this. When you're piping, it's important to do a few things here. Obviously, you want to connect up all your plumbing and do a pressure test. We recommend testing with water. Somewhere around 50 to 60 psi should be sufficient for your test. Hold it for a few hours. Some jurisdictions, they require a higher test. They like to see higher pressures than that, and they like to see you hold it overnight. Not a problem. It's more is better. Absolutely, at the end of the day, you want to make sure that you have 0 chance of a leak in your piping. And of course, be very careful after you do your pressure test. If you have, while you finish off your concrete pour and other things too, the last thing you want is to go to turn the water on for your park and discover that something underground is not holding water. So very important. Some people also test with air. It's not recommended simply because when air fails on a pressure test, if a fitting blows or anything else like that, it tends to explode outwards. It can be a little bit dangerous. So especially if you get into higher pressures, like 100 psi with air, you want to be really careful. It's pretty charged system, so stick with water. You don't have to do massive pressures unless your plumbing code requires it. Our features only run around 20 psi, so check with your manufacturer what the pressure of their features are to make sure that your pressure test is at least double that, and you can hold it for a good amount of time to make sure that you have no issues. For our friends that are overseas, there's different piping all over the world. So be careful. Make sure that whatever you're connecting into, that you might need an adapter. I know we send metric adapters to our partners in Europe and Australia, and typically it's just a slight difference in piping size. There's a whole history of piping. That's a different webinar that's probably taught in a university course somewhere, but it can be frustrating for an installer if you have all your piping run, you go to connect to the components, and it doesn't quite fit. It's not quite right. You also have to watch different threads as well. There's NPT, there's VSP, there's a whole bunch of other different thread types out there. Just because you have a threaded piece and it looks like it's the right size doesn't mean that the threads match up. So do your homework ahead of time, check with your manufacturer, especially if they're new to that area, look at this pipe specs specifically and make sure that it's going to work out for you. The other thing with piping to consider is the pipe material. I know we quite often get asked, what kind of piping do you recommend? I think it actually came up in yesterday's webinar too. HDPE and PVC are the most common types of piping that we see. Sked 80 PVC is what we recommend, as well as HDPE, simply for the strength. And if you go to Sked 40 PVC, Sked 10, it might work, but we want this to work for a long time. We want this to have as little chance of failure as possible. If you put quality into your pipe work, you can sleep easy at night. You don't have to worry about issues over time as things shift and settle and move. PVC also allows you to do a nice low point drainage. HDPE is a little tougher because it's flexible, but if you do a solid run, it's definitely possible. And what I would recommend though is still blowing out the lines at the end of the season, as well as trying to gravity drain them. Be prepared to do both those items. And that's going to be covered in more detail in our operation and maintenance webinar that happens on Friday this week. When we talk about low point drainage, this is simply the lowest point of the system here. You can see it's just a schematic right near the manifold. Essentially, all of your features from the park, if you were to crack open this valve, all of the water in the lines would drain out this common low point, and you have a connection to sewer to take care of the water. Now, this isn't always possible on an installation just due to the site and access and everything, but whenever possible, it's the best way to help your customers with winterization. If you have cases like this beautiful photo down on the side here, obviously water's going to freeze if it's in the lines and crack, and come springtime, this will be an empty park. It'll be really sad, and we don't want to see that happen. So take care with your low point drainage, make it easier for the future, and life will be good. When you're talking about your final slab, it could look like this. It could look like, you might have rebar, you might have wire mesh, you might be doing a complicated rooftop install. I know we had some questions yesterday about that. So this might look a little different depending on your specific installation. But typically what we see is between 4 and 6 inches thick. Especially for our partners in the States, you need to watch your ADA slopes. Maximum slope is 2%. So be careful that you're not exceeding that slope, but you still need positive slope to drainage. You don't want any spots that have any low point or any chance of pooling. Another commonly overlooked item is ground spray locations. So when you're doing your concrete, and especially as you're pouring, you can see here things get busy, they get a little hectic. You might not be paying close attention behind you and around you because you're so focused on the concrete. We've seen cases where people accidentally pour over top of their ground sprays, and they actually embed them in concrete. So we've had different, some people put their ground sprays just a little bit proud. Some people mark them with flags. Be sure that your concrete, especially if you sub it out, that your concrete workers know exactly where the ground sprays are, that they're taking great care around them. We have some installers handle it different ways. Everybody comes up with their own method, but I think my favorite personally is the flags on top, just to really mark where they are. And you might also be dealing with templates or graphics plates that go in the future. So you can see here in this photo, this is what these plywood pieces are here, and they're essentially forming out the concrete a little bit, but you wouldn't want to do that with a finished graphics plate. So when you're done your concrete pour, you pop the template off and you put the final plate in, and it's beautiful. It matches up perfectly. Be careful around the edges. Take care. Lots of times it helps to put a little filler there. You can even use expansion foam. That way when you pull the plywood up, it doesn't take concrete with it. It doesn't chip out around the edges. I mentioned drainage. Make sure that you have good slope to drains. Again, health authorities will look for things like water pooling on the deck. Be very careful about, you make sure you have no low spots. And also when you're running water towards the drains, try not to run them over top of ground sprays. Try to keep your drainage paths, the lowest points, away from the features. In fact, it's a good idea to crown up slightly to your ground sprays and other components. If they have water draining over top from other components behind them, it affects the display of the components. It can change the look of the park drastically, and you really don't want to have that if you can avoid it at all. The other thing we get asked about quite often is finishing on the concrete. Do I put a sealant on this? Do I polish it up? Please don't do that, because if you do, it could get really, really slippery. I know even with painting it, you have to be very careful that you're not introducing a slippery surface. Same goes for safety surfacing. Be very careful. It can actually be more slippery, and kids can actually surf along safety surfacing and things like that. So our recommendation, and this has been industry standard throughout the whole time that we've been doing stray parks, close to 30 years here, is a light broom finish concrete. And just a light broom finish gives it enough texture that children can run. They have grip. They're safe. They're not, nothing's going to be slippery for them or dangerous in any way. We've seen parks where they put a sealant on, and while it might be good for durability and it might have other benefits, unfortunately, it does get slippery when it's wet. So you have to be very careful about that. So when we're talking about other final steps, what you're going to be doing is taking out your plugs that were there for the nozzles. You had those in for pressure tests, and putting in performance nozzles. When you do that, please remove your blanks and flush the lines. Run them for a few minutes, get all of your construction debris out. Don't let sand and grit settle in there, because if you do, and you put your performance nozzles in, you'll be cleaning out your nozzles for the first few weeks of the park operation. So take them out, flush the lines for a couple of minutes, make sure, even that's a good chance to check out your drainage, make sure everything looks okay there, there's no concerns. You'll be happy that you did that, and it'll really help, especially for opening day. Opening day, you want the park to look fantastic and great, and you want the customer to be overjoyed. If you are the park owner, you want to be overjoyed. Flush them out, get it all tuned up, give yourself lots of time. You don't want to come down to the last minute to be doing this. An hour before grand opening is not a good time to be flushing out your nozzles if you can help it. Feature cleanup, so give them a good coat of wax. You can polish them up, clean them up, make sure that the construction debris is off them. If you were smart and you kept your wrapping on most of the time, take the wrapping off and make sure that everything looks polished and bright and brand new. The other thing to do is, as you're talking with your, if you're an installer and you're working with a park owner, this is the time when you start to talk through the maintenance schedule. You want to talk through different checklists. Manufacturers should have checklists that they can provide to you, along with an operations manual. So work with the manufacturer, take all of your checklists and make sure that the owner has those, that they know what they need to do, and you can do a walkthrough with them, show them exactly how everything works. Make sure that the person that's actually going to be operating the park is there as well. So you really want to make sure that they understand what they're buying, that they're excited, and that they have all of the documentation and material that they're going to need for the future at that park. And then finally, don't forget your blue ribbon. Celebrate. This is, it's not the easiest installation in the world, but it's certainly fantastic. And look at the end result here. It's, it's a really cool way to celebrate community. And especially during these times, we miss this. This is something that's crucial and very important to our world. So I think especially after COVID, we're going to be celebrating that much harder at the grand opening of every other park. So, take pride in it, take photos, send us photos. We love getting photos. We don't always get the privilege to get out in the field and see our final, see where our product ends up. We see it leave our factory and that's it. So send photos to your manufacturer. They'll love you forever. It's certainly great, but definitely show up for opening day. As an installer, you can be there to troubleshoot if something goes wrong, or just to celebrate. And it's a great time. So be sure to plan that into your schedules at the beginning. And that's an installed park. So I'm going to open it up for questions here. So we're just going to swap over here. This is an excellent question from Dean. Placing and finishing concrete around intricate decorative ground sprays such as ants, frogs, and snakes can be difficult. Any tips? Yeah, Dean, that's a great great point there. It can be tough to get in there. You really need to take your time, and if you use, I've seen people use like a skinnier tool to get in along some of the tighter spots. It's difficult, but if you take your time, it can be done. We've seen some really good installs. We've seen some tougher installs, but it's essentially, if you have a person that's detailed, they're able to take their time around the edges. If you can use a little bit of expansion foam as well, and then if you do have some trouble around the edges, you can use some silicone to finish it off nicely. For our product line with that, our design has actually been tweaked to make it easier. There's less tighter spots and things like that too, to make it easier for installers. So yeah, that's something that's also good to consider ahead of time when you're looking through the installation documents and you're looking at different specs and submittals, is making sure that you understand those little tweaks and tough spots. We have a question here. What is ideal finish for the ground spray? Now, Manish, I'm not sure if I fully understand the question here, but if you wouldn't mind clarifying, are you talking about the actual nozzle itself, or are you talking about the area around? Then I can come back to that, and if you put a clarification in the chat there, then I'll come back to that one. What would be the maximum height above finished grade to crown a ground spray? Great question, Mitch. That's excellent. So I've seen typically even just 1/8 of an inch is just enough so that if you have water draining, it's discouraged from going around, it is encouraged to go around the feature, not over top of the feature. So even just 1/8 of an inch, and even your concrete guy can almost form it up a little bit as he's doing his finishing. And you don't want to do a lot, because obviously then it's a tripping hazard. You don't want to have any edges either, so you really want to smooth up to it when you're doing your concrete. You don't want any exposed edge, because then it becomes a trip hazard, and it's not such a great idea. We have a question here from Marianne. What about using poured rubber on the concrete? So we see this, and it is something that's being discussed a lot in the industry. We still, in our experience, it still can be quite slippery. The other thing is it doesn't seem to last all the time. Check your warranties very carefully, see how long they guarantee the product for, and make sure that it's not going to become a maintenance headache for your customer. The last thing you want to do is introduce something where they have to fix it every year, every 2 years, or something that's going to be all chopped up so children are picking at it and things like that. And I'm not here to say yay or nay on poured rubber. It's something that your customer is going to need to consider, and it might be, all you can do is present, the facts and maybe look at some reference projects as well. See if you can find 5 reference projects in the area that have lasted more than 5 years, and if so, well, I would probably say give it to your customer and let them make the decision. The other hard part about that is it's quite expensive. So it tends to, shrink your park a little bit, which is not always so great for the children. Light broom finish concrete, in our experience, is great for texture. It's very safe. Yes, kids can fall and skin their knee, but that's pretty normal, and that's part of play. And it's an important thing to learn. That could be a whole other debate that I'm walking into, and I would be very careful there that, just make sure you're getting a quality product that is going to last. So Manish has clarified his questions. So you're asking about the ideal finish for the ground spray, the area around, and the floor finish. Yeah, so light broom, like a broom finish texture on your concrete. So concrete, just with that little texturing, is sufficient for ground sprays and any any spray park component, actually. That's typically what we see around the whole park. So I hope that makes sense. If not, please try me again. Okay. So I think we're coming up to the top of the time here. I see a comment from Jonathan. He says, yeah, we used rubber before at an owner request. Didn't work out well at all. Won't do that again. So we do hear mixed results on the rubber. It's a great concept in theory and everything, but unfortunately, that's been what we've seen. So yeah, as Catherine just posted in the chat there, if you have more questions, you want additional information, you can reach us at info@waterplay.com. Now, tomorrow's webinar is going to be about activity towers and structures. So if you're doing a slide structure, that's the session for you. So please tune in tomorrow. You won't have to listen to me either. We have a new presenter. I get a break. So Kyle Lusu will be presenting tomorrow. He's one of our lead product engineers. So we're excited to hear him. And thank you all for your time and attending. Hope you have a great day and stay safe.